The notification said, "Delivered." Kathleen Thompson stared at those 9 letters like they were a death sentence typed in lowercase. Her phone glowed blue-white in the dark of her bedroom, and the photo, her photo, the one she'd spent 20 minutes convincing herself was brave and not stupid, was sitting in the inbox of a complete stranger named N. Mendoza. She zoomed in on the preview with fingers that had forgotten how to work properly. There she was. Long brown hair loose over her shoulders, black satin against pale skin, the lamp on her nightstand casting exactly the kind of warm, soft light that had made her think, just for a moment, that she looked like someone whose life wasn't quietly falling apart at the seams. She looked beautiful. She looked confident. She looked like a woman who sent photos like this on purpose. She had not sent it on purpose. No, 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 no! Her voice climbed with each repetition until her cat, Winston, lifted his head from the foot of the bed and regarded her with the particular disdain that only cats and ex-boyfriends had perfected. But let's go back, because 37 minutes earlier, Kathleen Thompson had been having what she was already prepared to nominate as the worst evening of her 27 years on this planet, and the bar, frankly, had been high. It had started in the hospital break room at 6:52 p.m., when her colleague, Dr. Marcus Webb, had pulled up the hospital's internal news feed on the communal screen to show everyone the announcement. There, in clean sans serif font, beneath a photo of 2 smiling people at a vineyard, was Dr. Elliot Hayes and his fiancée, a woman named Claire, apparently, a woman who existed, apparently, a woman Elliot had been quietly building a future with for the past 2 years, while Kathleen had been quietly building feelings for him in the adjacent on-call room. 4 years. She had spent 4 years making herself smaller in his orbit, agreeing with his opinions about films she hadn't seen, and laughing at the right moments, and waiting, patiently, to be noticed in the way that mattered. The announcement had been up on the screen for 11 seconds before Kathleen said, very calmly, that she needed to check on a patient and walked out. She hadn't cried in the car. She was proud of that. She'd driven home white-knuckled on the expressway while Jade's voice messages stacked up in her phone. "Kathleen, Kathleen, call me back immediately. I am not kidding." And by the time she'd pushed open the door to her apartment, something in her chest had gone very quiet in a way that felt more dangerous than grief. She changed out of her scrubs, put on the black satin pajamas she'd bought for herself 18 months ago on a particularly hard Tuesday, the ones that had lived folded in her drawer ever since, like a promise she hadn't cashed in yet. She stood in front of the bathroom mirror for a long time. Then Jade's final voice message played through her phone's speaker, resting on the vanity. "Okay, I know you're not answering, but listen, you are gorgeous and brilliant, and Elliot Hayes is a man who irons his lanyards. You know what you should do? You should take a photo, like a photo. Remind yourself you're a whole person, and he's just a footnote. Send it to me. I want to see it. You deserve to feel like yourself tonight." Kathleen had looked at her reflection for another long moment. The photo, when she took it, was honest. It was daring. It was hers. The first thing she'd done in 4 years that had nothing to do with being palatable to anyone else. She typed, "Be honest. Too much or exactly enough?" She tapped send. She did not send it to Jade. Her contacts had auto-corrected to N. Mendoza, a name she barely recognized, a number that ended up in her phone 6 weeks ago at the hospital's charity auction when she'd been collecting business cards for the events committee and apparently hadn't been paying close enough attention. The message delivered at 11:14 p.m. on a Tuesday. Kathleen's first instinct was to unsend it. Her phone, a model that's seen better years, confirmed this was not an option available to her. Her second instinct was to throw the phone into Lake Michigan and relocate to a different time zone. Instead, she did what any reasonable person in the grip of a full system failure would do. She sent 6 follow-up messages in 30 seconds. "Oh my God, wrong person. Please delete that immediately. I am so sorry. This was a complete accident. That was meant for my friend. Please pretend you never saw it. I am genuinely begging you." Then she waited. 1 minute, 3 minutes, 7 minutes, nothing. Maybe he was asleep. Maybe he was a normal, decent human being who understood that accidents happened and had already deleted it and moved on with his very normal, non-threatening life. Kathleen set her phone face down on the nightstand and told herself with some conviction that this was fine. Winston relocated to the pillow beside her and began aggressively grooming his left ear, which she chose to interpret as solidarity. "It's fine," she said to the ceiling. "People send things to wrong numbers all the time. It's embarrassing, not catastrophic. He probably doesn't even care." Her phone buzzed. She grabbed it so fast she knocked Winston off the pillow. The reply was 4 words. "Interesting composition. Nice lighting." The room temperature dropped approximately 6 degrees. Across the city, in a penthouse that occupied the top 2 floors of a building Kathleen Thompson could not have afforded to stand inside, Nathaniel Mendoza set his phone on the arm of his leather chair and looked back at the man across from him. The meeting had been running for 40 minutes. Dominic Reyes had been making the same territorial argument in different configurations for 38 of them, and Nathaniel had been patient in the way that a locked door is patient, complete stillness that suggested something significant on the other side. When the notification had arrived, Nathaniel had not planned to look at it. Roman, standing at his left, had caught his eye with the slight chin tilt they used for "something needs your attention." It was a signal reserved for credible threats and genuine emergencies. Nathaniel had glanced at the screen. What he'd seen was not a credible threat. What he'd seen was a woman, brown hair, honest eyes, warm lamplight, and then below it, 6 messages arriving in rapid succession with the particular energy of someone trying to outrun their own mistake. For the first time in longer than he could calculate, something in Nathaniel Mendoza's chest had moved. He'd locked the phone and returned his attention to Reyes without a word. Now, with the room cleared and Roman standing at the window waiting with professional patience, Nathaniel looked at the messages again. The photo first, then the 6 panicked follow-ups, then the 7th, quieter one. "Please, I don't even know how I have your number. I'm sorry." Roman spoke without turning. "Problem?" "The opposite." Nathaniel forwarded just the photo. "Find out who she is. Background, employment, connections, history, everything." Roman's reflection in the window registered a single raised eyebrow, the equivalent from him of open astonishment. Security concern? Nathaniel considered this honestly. In his world, beautiful women didn't accidentally send intimate photos to men like him. They sent them deliberately, as weapons, as entries, as carefully orchestrated first moves in games that ended with someone losing something they couldn't get back. He had learned this the way he'd learned most things, expensively. But those 6 messages, that raw, unfiltered, grammatically collapsed panic, the 7th one that just said, "please," that wasn't a play. He'd seen every play written. That was a person. "Not a security concern," he said. "Verify it anyway." Roman nodded and moved toward the door. Nathaniel typed his response slowly. 4 words, enough to confirm he'd seen it, enough to let her wonder what came next. "Interesting composition. Nice lighting." He set the phone down and looked out at the city. 10,000 lit windows, 10,000 ordinary lives running their ordinary courses at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday, and felt, for the first time in years, genuinely curious about one of them. His phone buzzed again within seconds. "I'm so sorry, Mr. Mendoza. Please delete it. This will never happen again. I don't even know how I got your number. Please." Nathaniel looked at the message for a moment. Mr. Mendoza. She knew his name, which meant somewhere at some point she'd had a reason to have it, and yet the panic was entirely real. He allowed himself a small, private smile, the kind that never made it into rooms with other people. This was either the most incompetent approach to getting close to him that anyone had ever attempted, or it was exactly what it appeared to be, an accident so pure, so thoroughly human, that it had landed in his evening like a stone dropped into still water. He had spent 15 years making sure nothing surprised him. He picked up the phone and began making arrangements for morning. Kathleen did not sleep. By 1 a.m., she'd convinced herself Mendoza was her hospital's legal counsel and would somehow file a complaint with the medical board. By 3 a.m., she'd settled on a more rational scenario. He was nobody, she was nobody, this was already forgotten. By 5:30, when her alarm pulled her out of a shallow, anxious sleep, she'd almost managed to believe it. She was wrong, of course, but she wouldn't know that until the black car was waiting outside the hospital and the man in the suit was holding open the door, and the city was sliding past tinted windows in the direction of a world she had never been meant to enter. This story is just getting started, and trust me, you need to see what Nathaniel does next. If you've ever sent something to the wrong person and felt the floor drop out from under you, this one's for you. Hit subscribe so you don't miss a single chapter. Drop a fire emoji in the comments if you're already on Kathleen's side, and an eyes emoji if you're watching Nathaniel very, very carefully. The morning after felt like walking through wet concrete. Kathleen moved through her shift on autopilot, vitals, charts, medication rounds, while her phone burned a hole in her scrub pocket. She waited until her break, slipped into the supply closet between the linen shelves and the IV bags, and called Jade. She whispered the whole thing in 45 seconds. Jade was quiet for 4 of them. Then, spell the last name. Kathleen spelled it. The silence that followed was not the silence of someone thinking. It was the silence of someone reading something on a screen that was changing the shape of the room around them. Kathleen. Jade's voice had gone flat in a way it never did. Don't react, just listen to me. This man owns 3 buildings in Manhattan, a shipping company, and according to this, a pause, 2 city councilors. That doesn't mean there's a Reddit thread from 2019, someone asking if it's true that Nathaniel Mendoza had a rival's restaurant condemned in 72 hours because they parked in his spot. That could be a rumor. The restaurant is a parking lot now, Kathleen. She pressed her back against the shelf and closed her eyes. The fluorescent light above her buzzed like it was trying to tell her something. She finished her shift. She documented everything perfectly. She smiled at Mrs. Calloway in room 4 and meant it, which felt remarkable under the circumstances. At 7:03 p.m., she pushed through the hospital's side exit into the cold evening air. The car was already there. Black, still, expensive in the way that didn't need to announce itself. A man in a dark suit stood beside the rear door. He didn't approach her. He didn't need to. He simply looked at her with the calm patience of someone who had never once considered the possibility of being told no. Miss Thompson, not a question. Mr. Mendoza requests a conversation. Kathleen stood on the pavement while the wind moved through her hair and the city carried on indifferently around her. She thought about saying no. She mapped out what no would look like, the walk back inside, the drive home, the waiting, the not knowing, the understanding that a man like Nathaniel Mendoza did not send cars once. She thought about Jade's voice going flat. She thought about the parking lot. Then she picked up her bag, walked to the car, and got in. Not because she wasn't afraid, she was. Every nerve in her body was spelling out the word danger in large, careful letters. But fear, she had decided in the space of 10 footsteps, was not a good enough reason to spend the rest of her life wondering what he wanted. The door closed behind her. The city disappeared behind tinted glass. And Kathleen Thompson, 27 years old, night shift nurse, woman who had spent 4 years making herself smaller, rode toward a penthouse at the top of the world and tried to remember how to breathe. She had no idea she was heading toward the moment that would change everything. Not the photo, not the apology. What happened inside that penthouse, what he said to her, that's what she couldn't have prepared for. And honestly, neither can you. If this story is already pulling at something in your chest, you're not alone. Drop a love emoji in the comments and tell us, would you have gotten in that car? Don't forget to subscribe to this channel so you never miss a chapter. We release new stories every single day. Like this video if Kathleen already has your whole heart. Share it with someone who needs a story worth feeling tonight. The elevator opened directly into the penthouse. No lobby, no waiting room, no buffer between the ordinary world and whatever this was. Nathaniel Mendoza was already standing by the window. He was larger than she'd constructed him in her head during the 40-minute drive, broad-shouldered, unhurried, wearing a dark suit with the collar open just enough to show the edge of the tattoo climbing his neck. His hands, when he turned, were tattooed too, intricate and deliberate, resting at his sides like they'd never once moved without intention. He looked at her the way someone looks at an equation they've already solved but want to verify. "Sit down, Miss Thompson." Not unkind, not warm, somewhere in between, which was somehow worse than either. She sat. He remained standing, which she understood was not accidental. He placed a single manila folder on the glass table between them and opened it without ceremony. Her hospital ID photo, her employment record, Jade's name, her parents' address in Naperville. Her stomach turned to ice. "You're not a threat," he said simply. "You're a nurse who had a bad night and an old contact list. I'm not interested in punishing accidents." She exhaled. "I am, however, interested in solutions." He sat then, controlled, unhurried, and laid out the terms like a man who had never once negotiated anything in his life, only stated conclusions. 30 days. She would serve as his private art consultant, cataloging a collection that had gone undocumented for years. She would live in the penthouse guest suite. In exchange, the photo would be permanently deleted, she would be protected, and when the 30 days ended, she could walk away without looking over her shoulder for the rest of her life. "And if I say no?" He considered this with what appeared to be genuine patience. "Then you leave right now, and I delete the photo anyway, because I'm not a monster." A pause. "But you'd spend a long time wondering if that was true." Kathleen looked at his hands, at the folder, at the city blazing 50 floors below like it had no idea this room existed. She thought about her apartment, her nursing shifts, the carefully managed smallness of a life she'd been living on behalf of other people's comfort. 30 days. "All right," she said quietly. 30 days. Something in Nathaniel's expression shifted, barely, briefly, like a door opening an inch before it stopped itself. He nodded once and closed the folder. Neither of them said what they were both already beginning to understand, that 30 days in that room, with that much unspoken between them, was never going to be simple. She said yes to protect herself, but staying in that penthouse, that decision had nothing to do with safety anymore, and deep down, she already knew it. What are your thoughts so far? Is Kathleen making the right call or walking into something she's not ready for? Tell us in the comments. If this story is hitting differently, please like this video and share it with someone who loves a story that makes them feel something. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. The guest suite was bigger than Kathleen's entire apartment. She didn't say that out loud. She didn't say much of anything that first morning, just unpacked her single bag into a closet that could have housed a small family, set her toiletries on a marble counter that reflected her face back at her in perfect, unflattering clarity, and told herself this was temporary. 30 days. A job. Nothing else. Roman showed her the collection room at 9 a.m. sharp. No small talk, no warmth, the energy of a man deeply skeptical of her presence but too professional to say so. Floor-to-ceiling shelves, crated canvases stacked 4 deep, sculptures wrapped in cloth that probably cost more than her nursing license. No catalog, no system, nothing. She got to work. What she found over the following days was not what she expected. The collection wasn't decorative. It wasn't assembled for status or investment the way she'd assumed a man like Nathaniel would acquire things. It was personal, obsessive in its specificity. Paintings of solitary figures in large rooms, sculptures that depicted hands mid-reach, fingers open, grasping nothing. A photograph of an empty chair at a set table, framed in the same dark wood as every other piece, hung where no guest would ever see it. It was the collection of a man who understood loss at a cellular level and had spent years surrounding himself with proof that other people understood it too. Kathleen stood in front of that photograph for a long time on the third day. "The artist was Estonian," said a voice behind her. She didn't startle. She was beginning to learn his arrivals, the particular quality of silence that preceded him, the way the room's atmosphere changed slightly before he appeared, like pressure dropping before rain. "He painted it the year his wife died," continued Nathaniel, coming to stand beside her. "Not close, but close enough. Painted the same chair 17 times. This is the only one he kept." Kathleen looked at the empty chair, at the plate set for someone who wasn't coming. Why did he keep this one? A pause, long enough to mean something. "I don't know," Nathaniel said. "I've been trying to figure that out for 6 years." He left before she could respond. She heard Roman's voice somewhere down the hall, then quiet. She turned back to the photograph and understood with the slow certainty of someone reading the last page of a book they thought was about something else entirely, that Nathaniel Mendoza hadn't bought this collection to fill his walls. He'd bought it to feel less alone. He never said it. He didn't have to. And that's the part that will stay with you, because some people carry grief so quietly, you only see it in what they choose to keep close. Does this story have you feeling things you didn't expect? Tell us in the comments. We read every single one. Please like this video if Nathaniel just broke your heart a little. Share it with someone who needs to feel something real today. And subscribe to this channel because we show up for you every single day with stories worth your time. Sleep had stopped being available to her somewhere around day 9. It wasn't fear anymore. That had settled into something quieter, something she didn't have a clean word for. She lay in the dark of the guest suite and stared at the ceiling, and eventually, at 1:47 a.m., stopped pretending. The library was dim when she found it, lit only by the city bleeding through the floor-to-ceiling glass. She pulled a book from the shelf without reading the title, folded herself into the corner of the large leather sofa, and didn't open it. She heard him before she saw him. Nathaniel appeared in the doorway in a dark shirt, no jacket, no armor, just a man who also couldn't sleep, holding 2 glasses of water like he'd known she'd be there. He set one on the table beside her without a word and took the chair across from her. For a while, neither of them spoke. It was the most honest thing that had happened since she arrived. Then she asked, quietly, because it was 2 a.m. and the dark had a way of making questions feel safer, "Who was Isabel?" He looked at her for a long moment, and then he told her. His wife, 3 years gone, a car accident on an ordinary Thursday afternoon while he was in a meeting he couldn't remember the subject of now. He'd spent the first year convinced he could have prevented it if he'd just been paying attention to the right things. He'd spent the years after that making sure he was never surprised again. He spoke without looking away from the window. His voice was steady and low and utterly devastated in the way that voices get when grief has been lived with so long it no longer needs to perform itself. When he finished, the silence was different, fuller. "His name was Elliot," she said after a moment. "He wasn't dangerous or complicated, he was just unavailable, and I spent 4 years making myself convenient for someone who was never going to choose me." She hadn't planned to say that. It arrived fully formed from somewhere she normally kept locked. "That's its own kind of loss," Nathaniel said quietly, "grieving someone who's still alive." Her throat tightened in a way she refused to give into. She stood eventually, when the city outside had gone as dark as it ever gets, crossed the room, reached the doorway and stopped, though she couldn't have explained why. Behind her, his voice came low and careful, like something being set down gently. "Good night, Kathleen." Not Miss Thompson, not the careful professional distance of the past 2 weeks. Kathleen. She didn't turn around. She nodded once, barely, and walked back down the hall to the guest suite, where she lay in the dark with her eyes open until morning came, and asked herself with growing alarm exactly when this had started to feel like something she wouldn't survive walking away from. Some feelings don't announce themselves. They just quietly take up residence, and by the time you notice, there's no going back. Drop a love emoji in the comments if this scene got you. Like this video and share it with someone who understands what it means to grieve quietly. And subscribe so you never miss a single moment of this story. She noticed it on a Tuesday. A black van parked across from the hospital entrance when she visited Jade on her day off. She wouldn't have thought twice about it, except it was there again outside the penthouse building when she returned that evening. And again outside the coffee shop on Wednesday morning, where she sat for exactly 23 minutes before deciding the oat milk latte wasn't worth finishing. Same van, same position, same patient stillness that had nothing to do with waiting for a parking spot. She told Roman that afternoon, quietly in the hallway outside the collection room. She gave him the plate number from memory. His expression didn't change. That was how she knew it was serious. Roman's face only stayed neutral when the information was bad enough to require it. Within 2 hours, a woman named Dana appeared in the penthouse. Athletic, quiet, watchful in the way that made it clear watching people was her profession. She sat in the lobby cafe across the street and read the same page of the same book for 4 hours, and Kathleen understood, without being told, that she was not going anywhere alone anymore. Nathaniel came to her room that evening just after 9. He didn't sit. He stood in the doorway the way he had that first night, filling the frame, controlled, except something was different. Something around his jaw, something in the precise, careful way he was holding himself together. "The Reyes family knows you're here," he said. "They know you matter to..." He stopped, rebuilt the sentence. "They've identified you as a vulnerability." Kathleen sat with that word, vulnerability, the way he'd caught himself before the version that was true. "So I'm a target," she said, "because of you." He didn't deny it, didn't dress it up or redirect it. He absorbed it the way someone accepts the consequence they've been dreading. "Yes," he said simply. She looked at his face then, really looked, the way she'd learned to over 17 days of watching a man who revealed almost nothing. And she saw it, small and carefully contained and unmistakable. Fear. Not the calculating kind, not the professional threat assessment she'd seen him run silently in rooms full of dangerous people. This was something raw, the fear of a man who had already lost someone and was watching the same weather system gathering on the horizon again. He was afraid for her. That landed somewhere in her chest and took up permanent residence. She should have been angry. She was angry, underneath it, genuinely. She had walked into a 30-day arrangement, not into someone's crosshairs. She had a right to that anger, and she held on to it carefully, because the alternative was acknowledging what it meant that his fear for her safety looked exactly like grief he couldn't afford to feel yet. "What happens now?" she asked. "You stay close. You trust Dana. You tell me immediately if anything feels wrong." "And the 30 days? Something moved across his face. "That's your choice," he said quietly. "It always was." He left without another word. She listened to his footsteps fade down the long hallway and sat in the room that was too big and too expensive and inexplicably felt, against all logic, like the safest place she'd ever been, which was the most frightening thing of all. Sometimes, the most dangerous place you can be is exactly where you feel most protected. If this story is sitting heavy on your chest right now, that means it's working. The museum looked like a dream someone had decorated for people who didn't need to dream. Marble columns, soft gold light, champagne served on trays by people trained to be invisible. Kathleen stood beside a Rodin sculpture worth more than her parents' house and told herself she was working, cataloging, observing, doing the job, and not noticing the way Nathaniel moved through a room like the room had been built around him. He told her twice before they left the penthouse, "Stay close." She stayed close. For the first 2 hours, it was fine, beautiful even, in the terrible way that things can be beautiful when you know they're temporary. She photographed pieces for the catalog. She spoke to no one she recognized. She watched Nathaniel shake hands with men whose smiles never reached their eyes, and understood, watching him, that he was the most fluent person she'd ever met in the language of rooms like this. Then she saw them, 3 men near the East Corridor, not drinking, not talking to anyone, not looking at a single piece of art in a room full of extraordinary art. Their eyes moved in the same direction, tracked the same figure. Her stomach dropped the way it had that night in the bedroom, holding her phone. She found Roman in 40 seconds, delivered the information in a murmur, watched his jaw tighten in that way that meant confirmed, and turned back to the room. One of the men had started moving. Kathleen didn't think. She was already walking, straight into his path, champagne glass tilted just enough, and then it was on the marble floor in a spectacular, resonant crash that turned every head in the room simultaneously. "I am so sorry," she said loudly, hand pressed to her chest, performing mortification she didn't feel. "I'm so clumsy. I'm so sorry. Could someone—" The distraction lasted 45 seconds. It was enough. Roman moved. Dana moved. The 3 men were escorted out through a side door with the quiet efficiency of people who'd done this before. No scene, no shots. No one in the room who hadn't been watching Kathleen's champagne disaster had any idea. She found Nathaniel in a back corridor 2 minutes later. He was already there, already waiting, already looking at her with an expression she had never seen on his face before. Something fractured beneath the surface, some hairline crack running through all that controlled composure. He crossed the space between them and took her face in both hands. Not rough, desperately gentle, like something precious he was terrified of dropping. "Don't ever do that again." His voice was so quiet it was almost not sound at all. She looked up at him, at the fear she'd seen before, now uncontained, running freely across every feature he usually kept locked. "Then don't stand in front of men with guns." He looked at her for a long moment. Then his forehead came down against hers, slow, deliberate, and they stood there in the back corridor of a Manhattan museum while the party continued on the other side of the wall, both of them breathing, both of them right at the edge of something enormous. When he kissed her, it was not planned by either of them. It was simply the only honest thing left to do. It was soft, brief, his thumbs brushing her cheekbones, her hands finding the lapels of his jacket without deciding to. When they separated, neither of them spoke. They didn't need to. Some things, once said, can never be unsaid, and some things don't need words at all. She walked into that gala as his consultant. She left as something neither of them had a name for yet, but both of them already felt in every unguarded, terrifying, beautiful way. It happened on a Wednesday. Not a dramatic Wednesday, not a day that announced itself with bad weather or a feeling in her chest or any of the signs that stories are supposed to give you before everything changes. It was gray and cold and ordinary, and Kathleen was walking the 2 blocks between the penthouse and the corner pharmacy where Dana always accompanied her, except Dana had gotten a call, stepped 3 feet away, and 3 feet was all it took. It was clean, professional, a hand at her elbow, a door opening, and then she was inside a vehicle, moving through traffic like nothing had happened, because to everyone on that street, nothing had. She didn't scream. There was no point in screaming. She focused on staying present, memorizing turns, counting minutes, the things her mind could do when her body had no options left. The warehouse smelled like cold concrete and river water. They didn't hurt her. They didn't need to. She understood her function clearly. She was a message, not a target, a way of saying something to Nathaniel that words apparently hadn't communicated. She sat in the corner with her back against the wall and her hands in her lap and waited with the particular stillness of someone who has decided that falling apart is a luxury she cannot currently afford. She didn't know how long it was before she heard it. A shift in the quality of sound outside, voices cut short, footsteps that moved with different weight than the men who'd brought her here. The door opened. Nathaniel stood in the frame, no jacket, an expression on his face that she had never seen before and hoped never to see again. Something beyond fear, beyond fury, something that lived underneath both of those things in the place where people keep what they cannot afford to lose. He looked at her the way someone looks when they've been running towards something and don't know how to stop now that they've arrived. She looked up at him from the concrete floor. "You're late," she said. Something moved through his face, relief and anguish arriving simultaneously. "Traffic," he said. He crossed the room and she stood, and then his arms were around her, not careful, not controlled, nothing like the composed, measured man who had spoken to her in terms and folders and 30-day arrangements. He held her the way people hold things they almost lost, which is to say, completely, with both hands, without any interest in appearing strong. Her face pressed against his shoulder, his hand at the back of her head. Neither of them spoke. The city existed somewhere outside. The warehouse existed around them. None of it was relevant. There was only this. Two people in a cold room holding on, saying without a single word everything that 30 days of careful distance had been trying to prevent them from saying. It had not worked. It had never been going to work. He came for her himself, not his men, him. Let that sit with you for a moment, because a man like Nathaniel Mendoza does not walk into dangerous rooms for people who are just business arrangements. So what does that make Kathleen to him now? And more importantly, what happens when she realizes it too? Tell us in the comments what you're feeling right now, because we know this one hit hard. Like this video if Nathaniel just completely undid you, and share it with someone who needs to believe that someone would cross every line to get to them. Subscribe, because what comes next will break you open in the best possible way. The adrenaline left her body somewhere between the highway and the penthouse elevator, and what replaced it was a bone-deep exhaustion that made her feel transparent. Nathaniel wouldn't let her disappear into the guest suite. She didn't know how to explain that she didn't want to. He went to the kitchen, she sat on the counter, and watched him move through it with the energy of a man who needed to do something with his hands. He opened 3 cabinets before finding the right pan, turned the wrong burner on first, reached for olive oil with the focused expression of someone performing surgery in an unfamiliar operating room. "Have you ever actually cooked anything?" she asked. "I have people for that. They're not here. I'm aware." The pan caught fire 4 minutes later. Not a large fire, a confident one. Nathaniel stared at it for 2 full seconds before Kathleen slid off the counter, found the lid, and dropped it over the flame with the calm efficiency of someone who had handled worse emergencies before noon on a regular basis. They looked at each other across the ruined pan. Then she laughed. It arrived without warning, from somewhere deep and overwhelmed, and once it started, it didn't stop. The kind of laughter that lives right next to tears and borrows their intensity. Nathaniel's expression held for approximately 4 seconds before something broke loose in him, too. And then they were both laughing in his immaculate kitchen at 11 p.m. over a pan of carbonized nothing, and there was something so profoundly unexpectedly human about it that Kathleen felt it rearrange something permanent inside her chest. They ended up on the kitchen floor with 2 bowls of cereal because nothing else had survived. When the laughter finally settled into quiet, the quiet was different from all the ones before it. Softer, earned. "She called me from the car," Nathaniel said. Kathleen went still. "Isabel, she called me on the way to pick up dinner. I didn't answer, I was in a meeting. I told myself I'd call back in 20 minutes. He looked at his hands. The hospital called first." The words arrived simply, without drama, which made them heavier than any dramatic delivery could have. This was a man setting down something he had carried alone for 3 years in a kitchen that smelled like burnt olive oil, on a floor that cost more than most people's cars, and none of that mattered at all. Kathleen didn't fill the silence with comfort. She understood instinctively that he didn't need comfort right now. He needed a witness. She stayed, she listened, she let it be exactly as heavy as it was. In the morning, he came to her door before she could decide whether to pack her bag. He stood in the frame, rested somehow in a way he hadn't looked in weeks, and told her plainly that she could leave, that everything would be handled, that she would be protected and financially supported and free to return to her life without a single thread connecting her to his world. Or, he said, you stay, not for 30 days, as an equal, on whatever terms you name. Kathleen looked at him for a long moment. Then she named them. She would keep her nursing license active. She would maintain her own bank accounts and her own friendships and her own identity, none of it absorbed into his. She would have full honesty, always, regardless of what that cost him, and she would never be kept safe by being kept uninformed. 4 conditions. She delivered them without apology or softening. He agreed to every one before she'd finished the 4th sentence, not because they were easy, because she was worth them, and he finally had the clarity to say so. She nodded once, then she unpacked her bag. She spent 4 years shrinking for someone who never noticed. It took one man, the most unlikely, complicated, dangerous one imaginable, to finally show her that the right person doesn't ask you to be smaller. They make space for every part of you, edges and all. Does this story have you emotional? Tell us exactly how you're feeling right now in the comments. Like this video, share it with someone who needs to hear that their conditions are worth setting, and subscribe, because the ending of this story is going to stay with you long after it's over. Her name was above the door. Not Dr. Hayes' nurse, not the girl from the night shift, not anyone's footnote or supporting character or quiet, patient presence in the background of somebody else's life. Just Kathleen Thompson Photography. 6 months. That was all it had taken. 6 months of mornings spent printing and mounting and curating, of evenings arguing with framers and lighting designers, of slowly, deliberately building something that belonged entirely and unmistakably to her. The gallery was full by 7 p.m. Jade was there in a red dress, crying before she'd made it through the door, which she blamed on the champagne despite not having touched it yet. Kathleen's mother held her face in both hands for a long moment and didn't say anything, which said everything. Her father stood in front of a large portrait of a night shift orderly Kathleen had photographed in a hospital stairwell at 3 a.m. A man caught between exhaustion and dignity, lit by a single flickering fluorescent, and cleared his throat twice in the way he did when he was trying not to fall apart in public. Roman stood near the back wall holding his champagne flute with the rigid discomfort of a man who had successfully navigated genuinely threatening situations, but found gallery openings categorically worse. He studied each photograph with an expression of fierce concentration, as though processing art were a security assignment he intended to complete thoroughly. Nathaniel didn't stand near the front. He never did at things like this. He found a place near the back where he could see the whole room, see her, and he stayed there, watching. That expression on his face, the private one, the one that had taken her weeks to recognize and would take her a lifetime to stop being grateful for. She caught his eye once across the room. He didn't smile broadly or gesture or perform anything for anyone around him. He simply held her gaze for a moment with everything in it. Pride and steadiness and something so quiet it could only be described as permanence. She looked away first because she had guests and because if she didn't, she was going to cry in front of everyone, and she had promised herself she wouldn't. She cried twice anyway. She found him in her home office 3 weeks later, standing at her desk with his back to the door. She knew before she saw what he was holding by the particular quality of his stillness. The frame was small, simple dark wood. The photo inside was the one, the original, the accidental, the one taken in black satin pajamas in a dark bedroom on the worst night of a bad week by a woman trying to remind herself she was still someone. "You kept it," he said. "It's where our story started." He was quiet for a moment, turning the frame in his tattooed hands, and she watched him look at it the way he'd looked at that photograph of the empty chair in his collection, searching for the thing underneath the surface that explained everything else. Then he set it down gently, turned around, and lowered himself to one knee on the kitchen floor, the same floor where they'd sat eating cereal at midnight, laughing over a burnt pan, both of them cracked open, and finally honest. He didn't have a speech prepared. She would love him forever for that. "I want to accidentally choose you," he said quietly, "for the rest of my life." She said yes before he finished the sentence, not because her life had become his, not because danger had softened into safety or complexity had resolved into simplicity, but because she had built something entirely her own, her name above a door, her work on walls, her terms in writing, and she was choosing him from a place of fullness, not need. That was the difference. That was everything. The woman who had taken that photo because she was exhausted from being invisible had spent 6 months becoming undeniably, irrevocably seen, first by herself, and then, in the best possible accident, by him. Some wrong numbers change everything. This one changed her life. And that, right there, is what it looks like when someone finally chooses themselves and finds that the right person had been watching all along. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something you needed to feel today, then it did exactly what it was meant to do. This story was never just about a wrong number. It was about a woman who spent years disappearing and one impossible, complicated, tender accident that reminded her she was worth being found. Drop a love emoji in the comments and tell us, which moment in this story stayed with you the most? Was it the 2 a.m. conversation, the gala, the warehouse, or was it right here at the end when she said yes from a place of wholeness instead of need? We want to know. Before you go, please don't forget to subscribe to this channel, hit that like button, and share this story with someone in your life who needs to be reminded that they are worth taking up space. We release brand new stories every single day on this channel, so make sure you explore everything else we have waiting for you here. Your comments mean more than you know. Keep them coming. We'll see you in the next story. Bye.